Hello, and welcome to the Dogfight, a podcast dedicated to the London Spitfire and Overwatch League. Fasten your seatbelts and observe the no smoking sign, because today we'll be discussing the Spitfire's nail-biting Week 2 wins, what's going on with the bottom of the barrel in Overwatch League, and what's to come in this week's matches. So I am joined by good co-host CJ. How are you today?
Hello, Internet. I'm doing pretty good. Having a good time. I am really enjoying the Overwatch League as it's been going. I'm
Yeah,
very
same here.
happy.
It's been pretty exciting. Lots of really good matches going on.
There's been a lot of twists and turns to
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
so...
for sure. There's been lots of interesting narratives, and I think I think the
Yeah,
most
for sure.
interesting is the Spitfires narrative because they played some matches and it was pretty exciting. They played against the Dallas Fuel and the LA Valiant.
Which, going into, the Overwatch League, from the word go, you would look at those two teams and think they're two of the best that they could possibly be facing, and one of those definitely lived up to the expectations with a really tense 3-2 win against the Valiant. But the Fuel was a very interesting matchup,
Yeah,
I
the
thought.
Fuel was kind of interesting. I think just because um, they have this roster that on paper looks really great. They have a lot of people that you would think would perform very well in this Overwatch League environment, but they have yet to win a game coming up to this match, and also they're just not looking really coordinated on the same page.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the big weakness for the Fuel is just the coordination. For whatever reason, their comms haven't seemed quite on point. Like you can see it even when they're running. It was to a lesser extent this week when they were running that core envious lineup. But you could tell that they weren't 100% on the same page. The tanks weren't engaging in the same place, the DPS weren't quite following it up, and no one was really covering for the healers, or at least not to the extent they maybe should have been. It's hard to say, though, when you had that roster together again and they were able to sort of work on their natural chemistry, despite the fact that it was a 3-2-1 in favor of the Spitfire, 3-2 win, I should say, in favor of the Spitfire. Words. 3-1 win in favor of the Spitfire. It was closer than that number would suggest, I think.
Yeah, you
Or more
definitely felt
competitive,
like
at the
they
very least.
were really trying their all, and unfortunately they just couldn't get it out.
Yeah. Yeah, it was one of those things where, if anyone of, lesser talent than Birdring and Prophet had been in there, because a couple clutch ults from those two, specifically, really sort of turned the tide, that Dallas could have walked away from it, hypothetically. It wasn't like an inconceivable
Oh yeah, for
chain of
sure. I
events.
think that had not our, I guess what we were calling our starting lineup so far play, I think we definitely would have struggled a
Yeah.
lot more.
Yeah, and I think it really shows that they've had these guys practicing their team chemistry, sort of getting used to engaging and working with each other, and it really does show. Like, the focus fire has been on point. They've made great work to sort of get the space for each other to use ultimates. Like, Prophet especially had a whole bunch of really fat ultimates that just cleaned up engagements with very minimal investment on the Spitfire side. And on Valiant, it was a little tougher because whereas Fuel had their strat and they kind of ran with it, Valiant was a little more adaptable. And I think especially in games 3 and 4 did a better job of stuffing that DPS duo whether it was like Prophet and Birdring or Birdring and Rascal. They did a better job of sort of keeping the DPS players from getting the work done
Yeah,
that they needed
definitely. I
to.
think the Valiant game, I think is probably the one we're going to be talking about the most, just because it was so close and it felt like everyone was doing everything they could to try to win on both sides, and everyone that both teams felt like they were on equal skill level, and it was just a matter of who could just do it more.
Yeah, it was the first time I think that the Spitfire were really. I think it's the first time that the Spitfire were really like properly put through their paces.
Yes. I think this week, especially against Valiant, they were being tested, and they won. But I think that I think some weaknesses for the Spitfire were exposed, which I think is good considering, one, it's early on in the season, and two, it's better to get these weaknesses exposed now to a top team that you did beat versus way down the line and you're messing up against bottom tier teams or something.
Yeah, and like they've already looked strong. They've shown what they can do against some of the top tier teams in the Overwatch League. But like coming up against this level of competition definitely sort of lets London get a bit of a tune-up. They know what they need to work on, and I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that honestly, this team definitely works really well in supporting each other by the strength of their individual play. Like, they have great chemistry, but one of the things that is like that makes this team so dangerous is that anyone at any time can pop off and get things done. Like whether it's Gesture or Fisher, they can create a tremendous amount of space for their team to do work. Fury does a great job of stuffing enemy ultimates, diving deep, and securing kills, whereas Prophet and Birdring are monsters and can mop up pretty much any fight you stick them in if they are properly supported through that fight.
Yeah, and I also think that our support line is fairly good. You have Badosin, who is generating...
Yeah.
He makes so many picks, which is the
thing. Left and right.
Like, he shouldn't be getting all of these kills, but he does.
Yeah, like, normally when you think of, like, Zenyatta's who are just nailing people, you think of probably Boombox, because he's the one who's sort of infamous for just landing those charged right-click headshots and wiping people out immediately. But Badosin is making a name for himself in that arena as well.
Our weakest link is probably... And I don't want to necessarily call him out, but I think Nuss has kind of been struggling. He struggled this week specifically just in staying alive because he was getting picked off more, and I think that might be because the higher teams will punish out of position Mercies more and try to go for Mercies more or something. I don't know. But he was getting picked off a lot more.
I think it was a matter of him being focused more by a team that was more capable of making that coordinated dive than it was necessarily a problem of, like, Spitfire peeling.
Yeah.
It's just, LA Valiant, that front line of Fate and Envy, they've played together a long time, working through Immortals before they became the LA Valiant. They've got a synergy that you might not have gotten a great idea of if you were watching Contenders Season 1, but they work together very well. And when you've got people like Agilities or Silk Thread, or Soon especially, and I do want to talk about Soon to a big extent when we're sort of going into the LA Valiant match in more depth, but they can put a lot of damage, they can secure kills for each other, and set up their DPS to do a lot of work. They're really good at what they do and focusing targets and making sure they focus the right target. And in the current meta, Mercy is really strong. If you have that Mercy res advantage over the other team, that can really, win a fight for you. Especially if you have Valkyrie up. And... Fate and Envy know that, so they're going to focus that Mercy at any opportunity they get and remove that factor from play. If they have the Mercy and you don't, that's a fight in their favor.
Yeah.
Just
and I think that Valiant did look extremely coordinated. Soon I think was also a big thorn on our side because he was just doing so well on, like, the Tracer and just zipping around and just causing so much annoyance that, like, you have to send someone to deal with them. Yeah. And, I think it was Birdring who was on McCree on Eichenwald that we probably could have won if he switched off. But I think he felt like he had to say McCree because they were just trying to dive so often. that he wanted like that safety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like I think that the pressure soon put on them in map 3 and 4 definitely contributed to that, because McCree is sort of the answer to Tracer, generally speaking, but McCree's also very immobile, meaning that Fate and Envy will perhaps have an easier time jumping in on him, and you could see Spitfire adapting to that later on in Eichenwald especially, where their front line would be playing very far forward, and you would see Birdring on the McCree pretty far back, so that he's able to land shots and not be pressured as much directly, because on Oasis he was getting focused and destroyed.
Yeah, Oasis was not
pretty short order.
I think we definitely need to work on our Oasis play, because we look super sloppy on that map.
Although I think a lot of that does come down to the fact that, like, in the early stages of the matchup, agilities didn't look great. Like, if you look at some of the earlier games in the Overwatch League, especially, agilities would pop his ult and come up either empty or he'd come up big. On Oasis, we saw the first bit of real consistency in terms of that high level of performance out of agilities. And whether he was playing the Pharah or the Genji, we didn't seem to have an answer for that. He would be able to, either move past or pummel through our tank line and hit the support and DPS line, and, he would sort of break apart the core of that team.
He really did.
A lot easier for the LA Valiant to,
he really did cause problems, but I think it all came down to map 5 on Lijiang Tower, and the Spitfire said, alright, time to stop fucking around and just smash these fools, and they did a perfect job on it. I think Birdring, and I tweeted this to London Spitfire, by the way, I think that Birdring deserves a raise for how he played Widow on that final round in Lijiang Tower that they played, because he was phenomenal.
Honestly, I think he deserves some kudos any which way that you put him in, because Birdring is really good on a big number of heroes. That Widowmaker on that last point, definitely, that's the thing that people are going to remember coming away from this, because throughout that matchup, Birdring was scoring headshot after headshot after headshot, and LA was pretty much forced to rethink their approach, just engagement to engagement, because any way they kept coming, he was the answer for them. He didn't really have any particular problems dealing with them on this map, but the dude played a lot of heroes at a very high level over the course of this series. He's one of those guys you can really sort of plug and play, and he'll do really well, whether it's hit scan or projectile or sort of
I think that's
offense. It's just
I think that's probably why he's the consistent starting member. Sometimes we would switch out Prophet for Rascal, depending on the maps, but he has been starting this whole time, and I think that's because he has a wide hero pool, and he can play all of those heroes extremely well. And the Widow was just the...
Definitely. And he also, synergizes well with whoever you put him.
And his Widow was just the exclamation point to kind of finish an already amazing match.
Oh, yeah.
But I guess I want to finish off this talking point before we move on, and just kind of ask you, what should London Spitfire look to really fix on, and what can they do in the sort of the immediate future to prepare for their next super big match that's in a couple of weeks?
Well, I think a lot of the problems that it was adapted to fairly quickly, but facing the Valiant, I think the problem that they had was, one, dealing with the focus on their supports, or on not the supports, on their DPS, because when Birdring was on that McCree and getting picked, I feel like the Spitfire didn't really have a tremendous answer to that. They didn't have something that could bring them back into the fight after Birdring was removed from the equation and they were down, nor did they really have something that could counter that focus onto Birdring. I think they need to work on sort of their answer to, okay, this is the comp we're running. This is kind of the weak point. Birdring is great on the McCree, but against a dive offense, McCree is a vulnerable target. What's their answer to the increased aggression that a McCree sort of baits out. If they can figure that out, the McCree becomes a lot more viable. Like, he looked strong towards the end of Eichenwald when there was enough distance between him and the enemy's front line that they couldn't dive him without overextending. And the other thing that I think they need to work on is just this is something that's going to come with time, but just that extra little bit of team coordination. I think Valiant worked a little more like a well-oiled machine. I think man-to-man, the Spitfire had a quality advantage, but when it came to team organization, I feel like the Valiant was stronger in terms of hitting the targets together and dividing and conquering and sort of the team aspect of the fight, whereas Spitfire were maybe a little bit worse off on that front, but their individual mechanical skill and, you know, just sort of how good they are at what they do made up for
Yeah, I agree.
And that is going to, I think, resolve itself as Spitfire has time to sort of work out their team chemistry kinks and get better. But the thing is, that's also going to improve for other teams as well. Like, Valiant has been together for a long time, but don't forget that a lot of their DPS players are new to that team. Soon, Silk Thread, they're new. They weren't with that team from the beginning. And they'll only get, I think, better with that team as it goes on. Just like Dallas is only going to get better when they've sort of had the time and practice to really incorporate their new players into that team chemistry that made Envious so successful on top of their mechanical skill.
It's definitely an arms race. Hopefully Spitfire can kind of keep themselves ahead of the pack and continue to be dominant. We'll just have to wait and see.
I think they... Yeah, and I personally, I think they will, just because they have so many players that are so good. Like, pretty much, if you swap any, like, in a lot of teams, if you swap people in and out, there's sort of an opportunity cost. Like, say you are, you know, Valiant, and you swap in Agilities over Soon. You've kind of lost that quality tracer. Like, not to talk down, you know, Agilities, of course, but he's not known for his tracer play. You can't do that at the level that Soon can. Nor can Soon necessarily play a Genji at the same level that Agilities can. But with Spitfire, you've seen the GC Busan guys, Hureg and Prophet, swap between their roles pretty consistently and perform at a very high level. They still mopped up in Apex and APAC as GC Busan, swapping their DPS roles. Meanwhile, you know, with the Cloud9 Kongdu side of the Spitfire roster, you've seen Birdring and Rascal pull out a ton of different heroes. You know that whatever you sort of plug into that roster, you can play at a very high level. Whereas other teams would sort of be limited with the substitutions they make. Spitfire's, like, overall roster quality gives them a higher degree of flexibility, I think, if they can, you know, get everyone on the same page.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure they will in time. But let's move on to our second topic. We're just talking about the bottom teams and all of the hecticness that has been thrown their way. The Dallas Fuel and Shanghai have not picked up a single win, or match win, I should say, not counting individual map wins, but and Boston and Florida have, you know, they have promising rosters, but they're 1-3 right now. So, you know, what's the deal? What's going on?
Okay, well, like I was talking about earlier, I think the problem with Dallas is just they need to work on their communications and their synergy. Like, you can see when they're running, like, XQC or Custa or, like, swapping people in and out, they didn't have the coordination to pull off sort of an aggressive dive comp. And they definitely had, you know, some creative ideas. Like, they would pull out the quad tank, or they would, you know, they had individual creative strats, but when those things kind of fell apart, they didn't seem to be on the same page. They couldn't sort of coordinate to get the wins.
Yeah, I noticed that as well from the fuel, where if things aren't going right, they can't right the ship and turn the match around. They just kind of go further down the drain, and then they eventually lose.
They tend to spiral. Yeah, and I think that the match against the Spitfire was actually sort of the first step in the right direction for them, where they played that NV core. You know, they played Taimu, Mickey, Coco, Chips, Harry, and, you know, they brought in Seagull a bit as well. Like, they played the roster that sort of got them to the dance to begin with. And they looked really good with it. They looked better than they had since their match against Seoul. And I think that comes down to the fact that roster, and Effect, how could I forget Effect? But that roster has sort of established chemistry. And when they work on the communications and build up that team synergy again, that's going to be good for them. And Muma from the Houston Outlaws actually brought up a good point in an interview, which I want to highlight, which is he said that he doesn't think that, you know, and this isn't a shot at Dallas or XQC or anybody, they just can't use substitutions in the way that they have, where they would make dramatic swaps in who's playing what on each individual map, when this team hasn't had the time to really know the ins and outs of each other's play style and be comfortable with each other. And it really fucked up their team chemistry. It kept them from performing at the highest possible level because these guys kind of play a little differently.
Yeah, it really does seem like they're trying to run before they know how to, like, crawl, right? Because they've had success in the past, and they're trying to replicate that for this.
Oh yeah. And I think that kind of lulled them into a little bit of a false sense of security, that they could sort of plug and play and it would work out. And I think the match against Spitfire kind of showed them that you need to build your core and swap in and out to supplement that core. And when they did that, it worked out well for them. Like, they swapped in Seagull over Mickey.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, they took a map off of the Spitfire. Yeah. And I think when they get sort of used to that and know sort of the substitutions they need to make and be a little bit more conservative with that, it will help them out. And when they work that out, as well as they iron out those communication issues, they're a team to watch out for. Shanghai, on the other hand, that's a lot harder to
Shanghai
say.
is such a weird story because there are people, like, calling corruption on the organization, and there's others are saying how, like, this isn't even, like, the group of the best, you know, Chinese players in Overwatch. They got, like, all these other people.
Oh yeah, people will point to the lineup from Miraculous Youngster and say, hey, you guys should bring them on board. And personally, I think the Miraculous Youngster guys could add a lot of depth to this roster, because one of the problems I think the Shanghai Dragons have is a lack of depth. Because when you brought this team together originally, Undead and Dia are both known for really high-level hit-scan play. And that sounds great. If you have two of the best hit-scan players in China, that's a solid threat. But the problem is, who's playing Genji? Who's playing Pharah? Who's playing Junkrat? Who's playing Roadhog? There's like a bunch of these little questions where this team's hero pool overlaps to such a big degree that there are glaring deficiencies. And you've seen them gradually working these projectile heroes into their compositions, but they're not playing them at a very high level yet. They're not, you know, getting the kills they need with them. They're not supporting them well enough for them to make a difference. So that's kind of a problem with them, is you have that overlap hurting them on the TPS side. I think it's hurting them on the support side as well, because most of the support players they have are known for playing Lucio. And Lucio's not in the meta right now. So you have guys sort of picking up heroes they're not known for and trying to get to that elite level that the rest of the Overwatch League is at. But they're not quite there yet. And if you're getting outmatched in the DPS, and you're getting outmatched in the support, and your tank line's coordination, the dive, isn't quite there, I think, in terms of their ability to hit targets simultaneously and focus people down before the support can bring them back up. If you can't outmatch any given team on any of those fronts, you're not winning a match.
Yeah,
You're just not.
I also noticed something interesting. So you mentioned how they have a few players that are really good at Lucio. I've noticed that other teams are having the same problem where they have a really strong Lucio player, but since Lucio isn't meta, you're forcing them to be on these other heroes that they're not comfortable on, and they're really struggling. And I find that really interesting.
Oh yeah, and the thing is, like, Lucio's been a part of the competitive, like, professional level meta since pretty much the very beginning of Overwatch as an esport. This is really the first time where Lucio hasn't been a factor, and I think a lot of teams weren't really grinding Mercy. Like, the only Mercy specialist I can think of off the top of my head was Ginger Pop. But, you know, you have to sort of adapt. And you need your team compositions to adapt. And it's hard to do that, especially when that Mercy nerf is coming through at some point in the near future.
Do you think that other supports like Lucio will start to rise back up once the Mercy nerf comes through in competitive?
Yeah, I definitely think so, because, like, the reason Lucio kind of fell off is because of the strength of Mercy. The Zenyatta is really important, especially in a dive comp, because of the extra damage that the Discord Orb allows you. Discord on a target, focus fire that target, they're going to melt in short order. Lucio doesn't give you that particular bonus, and Resurrection is just stronger than the speed boost. So I think when Mercy gets nerfed, Lucio's going to come back into the meta, and I wouldn't be shocked to see Moira Lucio, the healing support you usually see with that, like, quad tank composition. I would see that coming in more often. Like, that'd be my personal prediction.
Yeah. Also, just as a side note, quad tank is super fun to watch, just because you just have all these like big beefy heroes just like swinging and just punching each other forever.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, it's it's a bulldozer.
Hilarious.
It's a composition that's made to pummel someone to submission.
Yeah, but also really quick, how do teams like Boston and Florida fix their issues? Because they have promising rosters, right? Like Boston has Striker and Dreamcapser, who have stolen the hearts of everyone.
Yeah, Dreamcasters definitely performed better. Yeah. Dreamcasters performed a lot better than I thought he would. Strikers performed a lot better than I thought he would, you know, like, I'll admit I was a little, like, down on Striker in week 1 when we were recording this. I was, you know, I was definitely saying, like, oh, Striker's good, but he's not at that level, and I think he's proven me wrong, and I'll be the first to admit that, you know, like, Striker, good shit. But, I think Boston, I'll go with what Monty and Doa have said, because that has kind of been my personal takeaway from the Boston games that I've watched, which is Boston definitely looks like they are a team that has been practicing together a lot. Their strategies are, you know, they have their set plays, they know how to execute them, and they have a really strong sort of synergy on those compositions. But when that doesn't work is where they kind of run into a roadblock. They know they've practiced these compositions, but they don't have the strategic flexibility to deviate from that just yet. When they're forced to improvise and, you know, try and come up with something that isn't their standard play, they look significantly weaker. And they've definitely sort of incorporated more strategies and more compositions into the more recent games that we've seen from them, but they're not on that elite level just yet. But they're getting there. And I think they just need to keep working on that and build up that chemistry on a larger variety of compositions so that they have an answer to enemy strategies. So that when they've run a composition, when they've hit their default game plan and it hasn't quite worked, that they have something that they can flex onto that they're not weaker on.
Yeah, that totally. I totally agree with that. I think that they can go far. I think that if they continue to improve more, they can definitely make playoffs. And I think Florida can maybe be in the same situation. They have the pieces of the puzzle. They just need to put the puzzle together. And if they can get it all working, it's fine.
And I think. Mm-hmm. And I think, well, the Florida situation is also relatively similar in that I think, to a certain degree, it comes to inflexibility. Because they have that six-man roster, and that six-man roster is very good. But there are still limits to what that six-man roster can do.
Yeah.
Logix has definitely sort of shaken off his stage nerves, but his Tracer play hasn't impressed me to the level that it has in the past. Swoosh has looked a lot stronger on the Winston than he has in the past, but, sometimes you need Orisa or Reinhardt, and those look a little shakier to me than, they do from other teams. Tvik, he looks great, but Zebasai, needs to work on his Mercy play, I think, and it just comes down to the fact that these guys, they have a great established team chemistry. They're really good players, and they can play. If you're in ideal conditions, they can go man to man with most of the teams in Overwatch League. But the problem is when the enemy team can sort of adapt and flex around, and you can't. You've put yourself at an inherent disadvantage.
But hopefully they can maybe up their game to.
I think so. And they have leveled up, I think, game by game. And they haven't gotten discouraged from the repeated losses up until their win over the Shanghai Dragons. So that's good. They've kept the
Sometimes
morale
that's all you
high.
need.
They haven't sort of accepted defeat.
Yeah. But let's move on to our final topic, which is the exciting match preview portion. Yay. So, week 3 of Stage 1 is actually pretty easy for London. They face the San Francisco Shock on Wednesday, January 24th at 6 p.m. And Thursday, they play the Boston Uprising. That's January 25th at 4 p.m. And this is all in... This might be Central Time. But just check the Overwatch League website. It has all the stuff in your local time.
It'll show it in your local time.
But, easy week, I think.
So,
I don't know about you.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an easier week because the Shock, I think they've performed better than people expected them to. But I think their off-tanks haven't performed to the level that people really want them to. So if you can take Nevix out of the equation, or Dante's usually on the Tracer, but if you can sort of take them out of the equation, you'll do pretty well. I think the guy you need to focus on stuffing, though, is Baby Bay. He's been their star DPS player. He's looked really good in the outings that he's had. And if he's taken out of the equation, I feel like that roster is significantly weaker. I feel like the pressure that Baby Bay exerts kind of helps to make up for little mistakes in the Shock's play. Like, you can't exploit it because Baby Bay's waiting in the wings to hit you in the face.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The Shock put a lot of stock on Baby Bay, and I also kind of feel bad for Nevix because when he was on Cloud9 Contenders, he looked amazing as the Genji player. He was like their Genji, and he did really well. And now he's sort of relegated to this awkward flex off-tank role that he's kind of good at, but he's also kind of struggles with.
It's hard to say. I haven't been really impressed by his diva play, especially because, generally speaking, that Genji play, the Tracer play, that's what I expect from Nevix, and that's what I'm used to seeing him do on a very high level. But his diva play hasn't been horrible, but it hasn't been enough to I think contribute in a big way to this team.
Yeah, I think. Oh, go ahead if you got another point.
No. Just I think when Super comes into play and when Sinatra comes into play, they'll have a little more options because Sinatra can run a pretty good Zarya. Super has a lot of flexibility. It just right now that off tank.
Yeah. I'm also really looking forward to when Sinatra does come in. I think another person we have to keep an eye on is Sleepy, because Sleepy has been doing a lot of work in the supporting role to kind of just keep the team healthy and keep the play like extended so Baby Bay can do what he needs to do.
He absolutely has, and I think that it comes down to if you can stuff Baby Bay, if you can pressure Sleepy and pressure Nevix, this should be a relatively
And I mean we crushed them in preseason 4-0. So it's not like it's impossible.
Yeah. Though, yeah, Shock has had time to improve.
Yeah, but so have we. Haha. Yeah, but I think this should be a 4-0 or at least a 3-1. I would not take anything less from our ace pilots. Moving on to the Boston match, I'm actually really excited because I'm kind of riding on that hype train just because I really like Striker and Dreamcasper. They're just such a cool DPS duo that I just like to watch them do stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're a lot of fun. Like, Striker has shown his ability to pop off. Dreamcasper, like, I had sort of had him pegged as middle of the road, but he's showed himself to be able to perform competitively on a number of different heroes. You can put him on the Soldier or the Junkrat or the Genji, and he can do well with it, which is not something I think anyone was really expecting when they saw his name on the roster, because he looked really good on his previous team, which I believe was Tempo Storm, but he never looked... I don't think anyone would have seen his performances on Tempo Storm and think, like, that's a guy right there. That's someone who can be, cream of the crop, top of the
pack, top of the pack,
the professional scene. Yeah, but he's shown that he has at least the capacity to handle those.
And like we said earlier, I think that if they continue to kind of hone their skills, they can do well. I also think Boston is just interesting because they have Gamsu, and I saw him when he played League of Legends.
Yeah, Gamsu is great.
So it's just cool to see, like, oh, I used to watch him play a different game, and now he's here playing this game.
Yeah, and Boston Uprising's head coach is Huck, former StarCraft.
Yeah, there's a lot of, like, overlap, it seems, with, like, League and Overwatch and StarCraft.
Yeah, there's some pedigree,
It's kind of weird.
It is. But getting into the matchup with Uprising, I think the key to victory for the Spitfire is, like I said, Boston doesn't look good outside of their practiced comfort picks. So I think the key is to take them out of their comfort zone. Work on stuffing their existing strategies, outplay them on the dive, focus the back line. Kellex has looked great, but, he's been prone to some panic ults. So if you pressure him, if you pressure Neko, and essentially focus the targets, keep them, from making the most of their ultimates, force them to adapt, because if you can stuff pushes and force them to change things up, I think you're going to get sort of decreasing dividends from Boston. The more they're forced to improvise, the more they're like, okay, our game plan isn't working. We need to do something different. Maybe it'll work. Maybe they'll hit the sort of compositional pay dirt and the practiced synergy of this team that, Huck said they're sort of picked on coachability, on the, way that he could instruct them and they'd listen and adapt and improve, and they've definitely shown that. But the thing is, unless that synergy, suddenly picks up a level that we haven't seen up until now, forcing them to improvise is going to remove a lot of the punch out of
Yeah,
this
I
Boston
agree. I
Uprising
think also
lineup.
just in more general terms, I think just preventing Stryker and Dreamcasper to just kind of teaming up and doing what they do is probably a big thing because it seems that Boston is
Yeah.
really living and dying by Stryker and Dreamcasper. If they can't get online and do what they do,
Oh, definitely.
Boston almost has nothing.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Because there are a lot of times where Boston has had a matchup that has looked lost, but a big play from them has either let them sort of achieve parity or pull ahead.
Yeah, they do all these like kind of surprising plays, and I think and it's definitely off of them.
I do think, though, that someone to kind of watch out for, because he is dangerous, and I don't think he maybe gets quite enough credit, is Kalios on that off tank role. Kalios is a great diva, but he's an even better Zarya. He is phenomenal at what he does, and if you give him the room to work, he can make a lot happen. You
Yeah.
can't sleep on him.
Well, we'll have to see how it goes this weekend. What are your predictions for the two matches?
Um, I wouldn't be shocked to see 4-0 on both. I would maybe give San Francisco a little bit of an edge. I might see them at 3-1.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat.
Actually, I'm going to flip that around. I'll give Boston maybe the 3-1.
Yeah, I think they have the potential to both take maybe individual maps off of us, especially if we kind of play a little sloppy because we're overconfident. But I think the match should just be ours on principle
Yeah.
of our talent is way more skilled than their talent.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I think, the key is not get cocky. Treat, each threat, each game as a high-level threat,
yeah,
and we'll
for
see
sure.
where it goes from there.
Well, I think that's going to do us for tonight. So, everyone, please put your tray tables up and return your seats to their full upright position because we're coming in for a landing. Thank you, one and all, for listening to our lovely little podcast, and we hope to see you in the skies real soon. Thanks for watching, and come back real soon.
Stay classy, Internet.